I've never been much of a night owl. Most nights, by 11, I'm half asleep with a book in my hand and the hum of the ceiling fan above me. But that night, sleep wouldn't come. The world outside my apartment was unusually quiet. No cars, no voices, just the distant chorus of crickets blending with the occasional whisper of the wind. The kind of silence that makes every small sound louder, the ticking of my wall clock, the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath my restless steps. I wandered over to the balcony, leaning on the railing, hoping the cool air would help clear my head. That's when I noticed her. Sophia. She lived next door. I'd only spoken to her a handful of times, polite exchanges in the hallway, a quick smile when we passed each other at the mailboxes. But even then, there was something about her. Something quiet. Something unreadable. That night, she stood barefoot on her own balcony, her silk robe tied loosely around her waist, the soft folds swaying gently with the midnight breeze. One hand rested lazily on the railing, the other holding a glass of red wine. I hesitated for a moment, thinking I should probably just step back inside. But before I could move, she turned. Her gaze met mine. And she smiled. It wasn't a casual smile, the kind you give a neighbor when you're being polite. It was slower, softer. A little secret hidden in the curve of her lips. She stepped closer to the edge of her balcony, close enough that I could see the faint glow of the porch light tracing the line of her cheekbone. Her voice carried across the quiet space between us, soft, low, deliberate, "Come over, after midnight." For a second, I thought I imagined it. I stood there frozen, my fingers tightening on the railing as if grounding myself in reality. My chest tightened, heat spreading somewhere deep in my ribcage, and every thought scattered except one: she was inviting me. Her gaze lingered for a heartbeat longer, then she turned away, disappearing behind her balcony door, leaving only the faint sound of her latch clicking shut. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Heavier. Charged. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to process what had just happened. My mind ran in circles. Why me? Why now? What did she mean by it? 100 possibilities twisted together, none making sense. And yet, as I finally stepped back inside, closing my own door behind me, I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't be sleeping tonight. Because somewhere on the other side of the wall, Sophia was waiting. And after midnight, everything could change. Each passing minute dragged slower than the last, the quiet ticking of the wall clock louder than the faint hum of the fridge. My apartment felt different now, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I'd do. Come over, after midnight. Her voice replayed in my head like a soft echo, low and velvety, carrying an invitation I couldn't stop thinking about. But there was something else beneath her words, something I couldn't quite name. Part of me thought it was crazy. She was my neighbor, someone I barely knew, and yet the memory of her standing there, robe flowing softly in the night breeze, glass of wine catching the porch light, felt impossible to ignore. I sat on the edge of my couch, elbows on my knees, running a hand through my hair. My chest felt tight, not from fear but from a restless anticipation I couldn't explain. 12:04, I finally stood. My heart pounded as I grabbed my hoodie, hesitating by the door. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore, it was the weight of the unknown, the sense that stepping outside would change something I couldn't undo. The hallway beyond my apartment was silent. The soft hum of the night wrapped around me as I walked, my footsteps muffled against the carpet. Every sound, the creak of the floorboard, the distant dripping of a faucet, seemed magnified in the stillness. When I reached her door, I froze. My knuckles hovered just an inch from the wood, my breath caught in my throat. Before I could knock, the door opened, just slightly. Sophia stood there. Her hair was loose now, falling softly over her shoulders, and she had switched off the bright porch light. Only a single lamp inside her apartment glowed faintly, painting her face in warm shadows. She didn't say a word, just lifted a finger to her lips, signaling me to stay quiet, and stepped aside. I hesitated for a moment, glancing down the hall as though someone might see us. But the building slept. No doors opened. No voices stirred. The world felt still, as if holding this moment for us alone. I stepped inside. The air in her apartment carried a faint, delicate fragrance, jasmine, mixed with something warmer I couldn't quite place. A soft jazz melody drifted from an old radio on the counter, blending with the distant hush of the rain outside. Sophia closed the door gently, locking it with a quiet click. When she turned toward me, she smiled, small, calm, but something behind it felt unspoken. Neither of us said a word. We didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than any conversation. And in that silence, I felt it, the subtle shift, the quiet gravity pulling me closer to her world, closer to her. Her apartment was warm, softly lit by a single lamp on the side table. Shadows stretched gently across the walls, and the faint notes of a jazz tune whispered from the radio. Everything about the space felt intentional, calm, inviting, safe. Sophia walked ahead of me, barefoot on the wooden floor, her robe tied loosely at the waist. She moved with the quiet ease of someone used to being alone, and yet, there was a kind of softness in the way she glanced back, as though checking to see if I'd really followed her in. She gestured toward the couch. "Sit," she said, her voice low, smooth, carrying a faint rasp that only made it softer somehow. I sat at the far end, uncertain, trying to ignore how aware I was of every detail around me, the subtle hum of rain outside, the scent of jasmine lingering in the air, the warmth radiating from the lamp beside us. She disappeared briefly into the kitchen and returned with 2 glasses of wine, setting one gently in front of me. When our fingers brushed as she passed it, the touch was fleeting but enough to leave a faint jolt beneath my skin. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I took a sip, letting the silence settle, letting myself breathe it in. And then, as though reading my hesitation, she leaned back against the couch, tucking one leg beneath her and looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, a mix of curiosity and something softer. "I don't really sleep much these days," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at her, unsure how to respond, so I waited. She swirled the wine in her glass slowly, eyes focused on the deep red liquid, as though gathering her thoughts. "This place gets too quiet sometimes," she continued. "When the city sleeps and the lights go out, it's strange how loud the silence can feel." There was something in her tone, not sadness exactly, but a heaviness that lingered beneath her words. I nodded slowly, letting the weight of what she said sit between us. "I know what you mean," I said softly. "Some nights, the silence feels heavier than the noise ever does." She looked up at me then, her eyes catching the faint glow of the lamp, and for a second, I saw it, the unspoken understanding, the quiet recognition that maybe neither of us wanted to be alone tonight. Sophia shifted slightly, her knee brushing against mine as she adjusted her seat. It was a small movement, unintentional maybe, but neither of us pulled away. The faintest trace of warmth passed between us, quiet but undeniable. We stayed like that for a while, 2 people, 2 glasses of wine, and a silence that said more than words ever could. And though we hadn't spoken much, I felt it, something fragile beginning to unfold between us. The rain outside had grown steadier, its soft rhythm against the windows blending with the low hum of the jazz still playing in the background. Inside, everything felt warm, not just from the glow of the lamp but from the closeness between us. Sophia leaned back into the couch now, her robe slightly loosened at the collar, though she didn't seem to notice or care. She tucked one leg beneath her, curling sideways as she faced me fully, her elbow resting lazily on the back cushion. Her hair, loose and slightly tousled, framed her face in a way that made her look softer than I'd ever seen her before. "You're quieter than I thought you'd be," she said after a moment, her tone playful, though her eyes stayed steady on mine. I smiled faintly, swirling the wine in my glass before setting it down on the table. "I guess I didn't want to say the wrong thing." Her lips curved into a small smile, the kind that seemed to hold something unspoken. She tilted her head, studying me for a long moment, and I could feel the weight of her gaze, calm, searching, but disarming in a way I hadn't expected. Then, as if absent-mindedly, she reached out, her fingertips brushing lightly across my forehead. "There," she murmured softly. "You had a bit of hair out of place." It was nothing. A simple, fleeting gesture. And yet, her touch lingered. I felt it, the soft pads of her fingers brushing against my skin, the faint warmth trailing in their wake, the subtle electricity sparking in the quiet space between us. My breath caught slightly, though I tried to steady it. Sophia seemed to notice. She withdrew her hand slowly, almost deliberately, before settling it on her lap. Her robe sleeve slid down a little as she adjusted, revealing the smooth curve of her shoulder illuminated softly by the lamp. "You're different from the others," she said suddenly, her voice low, thoughtful. I frowned slightly, curious. "Others?" Her gaze drifted to the rain-streaked window for a moment before returning to me. "People I meet. People who don't stay long." Her words were quiet, almost reluctant, but honest. I didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, though. It felt almost comforting, a shared understanding hanging between us. She shifted closer, closing the small gap on the couch without a word. Our knees brushed again, this time intentionally, and she didn't pull away. Neither did I. The lamp's soft glow painted the room in shades of gold and shadow, and the sound of rain filled the silence we couldn't seem to break. I realized then that it wasn't what we were saying that mattered, it was everything we weren't saying. Something delicate was unfolding, quiet but steady. And with every passing second, I felt myself drawn closer to her, standing right at the edge of something neither of us had named yet. The rain outside had settled into a gentle, steady rhythm, tapping softly against the windows like a whispered lullaby. Inside, the warm glow of the lamp painted everything in soft gold, blurring the edges of the world beyond these walls. Sophia rose from the couch without a word, crossing to the window. The loose fabric of her robe swayed lightly with each step, catching faint ripples of shadow in the lamp's glow. She paused there, resting one hand against the cool glass, gazing out into the night. I watched her quietly, taking in the delicate stillness of the moment. There was something unspoken in her posture, a mix of thoughtfulness and longing, like she was holding on to a memory only she could see. When she turned back, her eyes found mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled faintly, walking back toward the couch, her steps unhurried but certain. This time, she didn't sit at the other end. She lowered herself beside me, so close that the warmth of her shoulder brushed lightly against mine. I felt the soft dip of the couch beneath her weight, the faint shift of air carrying the subtle trace of jasmine from her perfume. My chest tightened, though I kept my gaze forward, trying to steady my breathing. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. Inside, it was impossibly quiet. Her hand rested on the cushion between us at first, fingers grazing the edge slightly as though testing the silence. Then, slowly, almost without thought, she let her fingertips drift closer until they brushed against mine. It was a small touch, light, tentative, but it sent a quiet spark through me all the same. Neither of us acknowledged it. Neither of us moved away. After a moment, Sophia leaned back, letting out a soft breath. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a hush that seemed to belong to the room itself. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it's nice, not being alone." The weight of her words settled over me gently but deeply, like something fragile being placed into my hands. I turned to look at her, and for a brief second, I caught the faint vulnerability behind her calm exterior, a glimpse of someone who, despite her composure, carried her own quiet loneliness. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, feeling it wrap around us like a delicate thread tying one heartbeat to the next. The rain tapped softly. The lamp glowed warmly. And there we sat, close enough to feel the subtle rise and fall of each other's breathing, close enough that neither of us needed to say anything more. It wasn't just the words anymore. It was the silence. And the silence said everything. The rain had grown heavier now, steady and constant, drumming softly against the windows like a distant heartbeat. The soft glow of the lamp seemed even warmer in contrast, wrapping the room in muted gold. Sophia hadn't moved from beside me. Neither had I. The silence between us was different now, not empty, but full, stretched thin by the weight of everything unspoken. I could hear her breathing, quiet and measured, and I became painfully aware of my own. Her hand still rested near mine on the couch, our fingertips almost touching, separated by nothing but an inch of space. I glanced down, just once, and in that same instant, she shifted slightly, her fingers brushing against mine. A quiet spark. Subtle, fleeting. But it was enough. I felt her pause, as if testing the moment, as if giving me the chance to move away. I didn't. Slowly, she turned her hand over, palm facing upward, resting gently against mine. Her skin was soft, warm, a delicate heat against the coolness of my own. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Sophia's gaze lowered briefly before she looked back at me, her expression unreadable, yet her eyes said everything words couldn't. There was a vulnerability there, subtle but undeniable, as though she was letting me see a part of her she rarely showed anyone. "You should probably go," she whispered softly, almost as if trying to convince herself. But her hand didn't move. Her thumb brushed faintly over the edge of my knuckles, slow and careful, and the smallest shiver went through me, not from cold, but from the quiet intensity in that touch. I searched her face, trying to read her thoughts, but all I found was that same quiet conflict mirrored in her eyes, hesitation tangled with something neither of us wanted to name. The jazz music hummed faintly in the background, soft and low, while the rain deepened outside, a constant hush beneath the silence. I leaned back slightly against the couch, grounding myself, afraid to move too quickly, afraid to break whatever fragile thing was holding us here. She shifted closer, just barely, enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, enough that the faint brush of her knee against mine felt deliberate this time. Her breath was soft, steady, and when she exhaled, I felt the faintest trace of warmth graze my shoulder. For a moment, everything slowed, the rain, the music, my heartbeat. And in that space between one breath and the next, it felt as though the entire night balanced on a single, fragile thread, suspended in the quiet gravity between us. The rain had finally stopped by the time I decided to leave. The city outside was wrapped in silence, the kind that only comes just before dawn. Through the window, the faintest shade of pale gold had begun to stretch across the horizon, soft and slow, promising the start of a new day. Inside, the apartment felt different now. The lamp still glowed warmly, the jazz had long faded into silence, and the air carried the faint, lingering trace of Sophia's perfume, jasmine and something deeper, something I couldn't name but knew I wouldn't forget. We hadn't spoken much after that last moment on the couch. There was no need. The closeness between us had already said everything. Sophia stood by the door, barefoot, leaning gently against the frame. She had tied her robe a little tighter now, but a few loose strands of hair still framed her face, softening her expression. Her eyes met mine, steady and unreadable, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Finally, she smiled, faint, quiet, but warm. "Thank you for staying," she said softly. Her voice carried the weight of something deeper, something she didn't put into words. I nodded, returning her smile. "Thank you for asking me to." A subtle laugh escaped her, barely more than a breath, and she shook her head slightly as though amused at herself. But then her expression softened again, and for a moment, there was only silence. She stepped closer, her hand rising slowly until it rested lightly against my chest. The touch was soft, warm, grounding, more than a gesture, less than a promise, but meaningful all the same. "It's been a long time," she murmured, her gaze dropping briefly, "since I didn't feel alone." I felt something shift inside me then, something quiet, unspoken, but real. Without thinking, I covered her hand gently with mine, letting the weight of that small connection speak for me. Neither of us said anything more. We didn't need to. After a few moments, I stepped back, and she let her hand fall slowly, her expression thoughtful but calm. I opened the door, the hallway outside bathed in the faint silver of early morning light. As I walked out, I turned once, glancing back. Sophia stood there in the doorway, framed by the soft glow of the lamp behind her, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part curiosity, part gratitude, maybe something more. "Good night," I said gently, though it was nearly morning. "Good night," she replied, her voice soft, lingering in the quiet space between us. Back in my apartment, I stood by my own window, looking toward her balcony as the first rays of sunlight began spilling over the city. Something between us had shifted, not rushed, not defined, but real. It wasn't an ending. It was the quiet beginning of something neither of us had expected, but both of us felt.